now. Good morning and welcome to the All Souls Community Forum, coming to you from All Souls Unitarian Universalist Church in Kansas City, Missouri. I'm Joe Robertson, a member of this church and a member of the Forum Committee, a forum that for nearly 80 years has sought out important conversations promoting critical thinking on the most compelling and challenging issues of our day. Today, we welcome Pulitzer Prize winning columnist Melinda Henneberger. While at the Kansas City Star, Melinda's razor-like reporting and writing on the brutal corruption and abuse in the Kansas City, Kansas police force and unified government of Wyandotte County highlighted a stellar body of work that twice earned her recognition as a Pulitzer finalist before the Pulitzer Committee this year deservedly awarded her journalism's most treasured honor. Melinda this month has begun doing her high brand of journalism as the Metro columnist now for the McClatchy sister paper, the Sacramento Bee. So thanks for joining us today, Melinda. There's a lot to talk about here. So where do you want to begin?
Well, thanks so much for having me. I am just going to talk for a few minutes about these stories, and I hope that people have a lot of questions. But I thought I would start with something I saw in the Star just a couple of days ago, and I'm just going to read a little bit from it. But the headline of the piece was, KCK says Galubsky lawsuit investigation could mean material financial loss for the unified government. So they announced, the UG announced that the ongoing federal grand jury investigation and the lawsuit could, quote, adversely affect its finances in the future. I sort of thought, well, they should have thought about that before they let this go on for 35 years and more. So they actually refer to this day to Lamont, because you know all this started with Lamont Mcintyre's wrongful conviction, Lamont, who spent 23 years in a Kansas prison for a double murder he did not commit. It's officials said that Mcintyre is alleging injuries that he sustained from his, quote, alleged wrongful conviction. Well, that's really how I got into this story to begin with in December of 2019. Now, Lamont Mcintyre had been freed more than 2 years before that, but he hadn't been compensated by the state of Kansas, even though Kansas had passed a law specifically to get him paid. So approving the compensation for him, they made him sue to get it, was always up to Kansas Attorney General Derek Schmidt. And the reason he wasn't approving the compensation was that officials in Kansas City, Kansas were telling him that this was not a wrongful conviction, that there was a lot more to the story, and that they should absolutely not look into any other possible wrongful convictions. So I just couldn't believe, after all that Lamont went through to be exonerated, that he was suffering from terrible PTSD and he had no funds to pay for treatment. I mean, after all he had been through, they were still putting him through it and still pretending that he was a guilty person. So I started to write about that a little bit, and the then mayor of KCK, David Alvey, told me, oh, there's more to the story. There's more that's going to come out. A spokesman for the DA, Mark Dupree, never agreed to talk to me a single time during my 5 years in Kansas City and during my years covering this story. But a spokesman for him told me, we've addressed the Mcintyre thing ad nauseum. And I said, ad nauseum, as in you're sick of it? And he said, we've moved past it. And they really had moved past it, and they still have, because the team that's supposed to be looking at other old cases completely fell apart. And Dupree right now goes around telling people he's not letting anyone else out, as if it were his prison system and his decision. It is his decision to do nothing further about it. And that's one of the many scandals within this larger scandal. At the time when Lamont still had not been compensated, I had an appointment to talk to Governor Laura Kelly about it. So I turned up at the appointed time, and her aide says, "Oh, I'm so sorry. She's been advised not to talk to you after all about this topic because this whole topic is just too hot. There's just too much political liability talking about this." So the Democratic governor of the state has never spoken up about, to this day, about what happens to her constituents in one of the few mostly Democratic strongholds in Kansas. Sharice Davids and KCK is in her district, has never spoken out about it to this day, even though they both know all about it. So eventually, not long after that, actually, Lamont finally did get paid. And that was mostly, I have to say, through the efforts of Kansas Senator Cindy Holscher, who worked very hard behind the scenes to help people understand that Lamont really is innocent. But I just couldn't understand how this could be the end of the story. So by this time, we know that Roger Galubsky, former KCK police detective Roger Galubsky, has coerced testimony, has forced someone into prison who he and the prosecutor, Tara Moorhead, have to have known at the time were not guilty. There really essentially was no investigation. This then 17-year-old Lamont was immediately arrested based on no evidence at all. And in fact, people who actually saw the murders and said all along it wasn't Lamont were hushed up and told that they would lose their children, they would be thrown in jail themselves if they spoke the truth. So someone who would do that, can it really be the end of the story that this one man is exonerated? Or wouldn't you want to know, if he did that, what else did he do? So I kept writing about Galubsky after that. And in last year in 21, I think I wrote 19 columns and editorials about it. And I just kept learning that the situation was even worse than I had thought. And every time I wrote about a victim, other victims came forward. Their stories all checked out. There were all things, that I could learn from what had happened way back then from independent sources. And they spoke out. It was so brave of them to speak out because they really were in fear of their lives. They said over and over, they told me Galubsky had told them he would kill them. Their bodies would never be found. It would be made to look like an accident. They knew other people who had disappeared. One woman who spoke to me, she was hyperventilating the first time she talked. And it's especially brave that they came forward because they have no confidence that anything is ever going to happen to this person. They've never been believed. And this man who for 35 years had a badge and a gun was believed. And for some people, he's still believable. The survivors also of women he'd been sexually exploiting who had then been murdered came forward to talk. And you just think, in what universe does a man who's been exploiting all these women, they disappear, they're murdered, and he's the one assigned to investigate the murders? I mean, it's truly KCK is, as a former FBI agent who'd been looking into corruption there in the police department back to the 80s, said this really is the land that time forgot. And over time, I started to see how this was absolutely not the story of one bad cop who managed to terrorize a whole community. It was a story of a whole system, and how everyone in the system turned a blind eye because Galubsky was really just a symptom of this corrupt environment. And he was not the only officer who was raping women on the street. And he wasn't the only officer in the drug business. He was definitely the most prolific criminal in the department, but the others didn't want to say or do anything, but in some cases because he had something on them, and in other cases because they would have been, they said, would have been ostracized for challenging him or challenging the system. He was a favorite within the department, and he was, as we know, the partner of someone who was the police chief until a couple of years ago. So I started to see that everybody knew. You know, as one of the former drug dealers who worked with Galubsky told me, you could see what was happening just by looking out the window of the courthouse. But nothing happened because the victims were poor and powerless and Black, and in the eyes of the system had no credibility. Victims still don't think anything's going to happen. And why would they think otherwise when the FBI has been looking at this case on and off since the 80s? Eventually, and I thought this was very helpful. Eventually, a couple of former KCK cops also talked to me. One Saturday morning, I had breakfast with one of the victims. And she was telling me that, yes, at the time, and she was raped for over years' time by Galubsky. And she was approached, as always, at her most vulnerable on the day when her sons were being arrested. Her sons are out in the police car, and he's telling her how nice her legs look. You know, he comes back later that week and rapes her and continues to do that, saying that if she'll be nice, if she'll be a good girl, he can help her with her sons. So one morning I had breakfast with her, and she said, you know, at the time all this was going on, I told my friend who's a police officer in KCK, I didn't tell him the name at first. He learned that later. So I went home and called this police officer, Sonny Callahan, completely out of the blue, completely cold. And I'm just going to read some of what he told me. He said, it's a jacked up environment, kiddo. You can't wrap your mind around the extent of what these women are saying. And even when you do see it, who are you going to fuss with? Who's going to listen? You don't know who you're talking to. So you just sit there. And it's almost like, as long as you don't put your hands on me, it's cool. And that's ridiculous. He said that even people who were worried about what was going on. He said there are too many people pushed in different directions in pursuit of being able to get along in the environment, which he described as extremely dangerous. He said it's not that they're all corrupt, but more a matter of not wanting to upset the culture. They don't want to be ostracized. They want to be able to work and not have any trouble. And the real deal is this: white folks just don't have the heart to jump into the middle of it. And this is how the status quo works. This officer is Black, and he feels particularly guilty because he didn't stand up for his own community, because these victims, as I said, are all Black as well, mostly Black. A lot of folks in law enforcement want something to happen, and many of them are afraid even now. He said they don't want to be viewed as turning against the thing or snitching. But he said he decided to tell me all this because this thing is crushing people. They don't want me to say anything, but I can't do this. I can't do this. That, I think it was a a big deal for cops to start to tell the story. And really lent some even more credibility to this incredible number now of victims who've come forward. I say, do there have to be enough victims to fill Arrowhead before something actually happens in this case? And two of the most important pieces, I think, that I wrote about this weren't last year, they were this year, right? Actually, both right before I moved here to Sacramento. One was about a victim who'd been recruited by Galubsky when she was just 12 years old. She had just lost her parents, so she was an orphan. She and some other kids her age had broken into some place, not even just to steal anything, just to fool around on the weekend. And so he kept her in his cop car for 8 hours, and combination of threats and promises, she went to work for him after that. And a little later on, she was rewarded for bringing in other girls who had sex with cops and other officials and would dance at parties for all these people. And, at 12 years old, that's what we're talking about here. And the second piece I wrote right before I left was about a girl who was raped regularly from the time she was 13 until she was 18. She said at one point she felt like she might be rescued because an African-American cop saw her with him, saw her crouched in the back seat of his car, as he always made her do when they drove around. And then she said that they looked at each other, she and the cop just put his head down and never did anything. And that to me is just like a metaphor for how the whole system turned a blind eye to what was going on. And, the extent of this operation really has only begun to come to light. There is so much more to be learned and so much more to be written. And as I said, the victims have not even begun to see justice. The new mayor in KCK, Tyrone Garner, promised when he was running for office that he would make sure all of this was properly, thoroughly investigated, all of it was made right. Now that he's elected, he doesn't want to talk about it, and he literally runs away when anyone tries. And now here we have the UG saying, oh no, if we lose the civil suit, that could cost us, instead of, oh no, we need to fix all these underlying problems, which are not in the past, because some of this stuff is still going on. Galubsky is still getting paid protection money, and nothing has changed, I'm sorry to say. I have said this before in print, but if women on Ward Parkway, a bunch of them disappeared, never to be heard from again, and someone who was found to have been sexually exploiting them is assigned to their murder, and then those murders are never solved, would that just be okay? And would people say, oh, well, that was a long time ago. Oh, well, those Ward Parkway girls need to make better decisions? Absolutely not. And, you have to wonder at this point how much the FBI wants to make this arrest. And this arrest and others related to it, because again, we're not just talking about this one person. Every single day, I hope that I will be proven wrong to have ever doubted them. But I'm still waiting. And a lot more importantly, the victims are still waiting too. So be happy to take any and all questions.
Thank you. Yes, we've been listening to Melinda Henneberger, the Pulitzer Prize winning columnist, formerly of the Kansas City Star, doing that work for the Star, and now at the Sacramento Bee. We're going to take a quick break before we get to questions and talk about how you can support this forum. We take a collection to help cover some of the costs of this forum, including the equipment and the staff, and so you can contribute online at allsoulskc.org by clicking through the support button and selecting the forum on the drop-down menu, or on Zoom now, you can see there'll be the way to do that will be put in the chat. There'll be a link in the chat. And so now, I guess now I want to ask you, Melinda. Now, first, have you ever met Galubsky? Have you reached out to him? What do you do?
Yes.
I mean, obviously you have, but what?
Reached out to him many times. He doesn't, of course, speak to reporters. He neither do his lawyers. You know, that's one of the many crazy things about this is they don't answer this stuff. You know, when he did a deposition in 2 parts in the civil suit, he said he took the fifth 555 times in the first day alone. So he doesn't answer this other than, you know, just a blanket denial. It's all untrue, but they don't even bother.
Okay, George has a question.
Yes, well, I'm trying to convert a comment into a question. When I was working with the Quindaro folks years ago, I met a man named Judge Sorter, who owned some of the property down by where the power plant is, and he warned me. He was a very old man at the time. He warned me that to go against some of the folks that were in Wyandotte County could be dangerous. He said, and I guess basically this. How far back do you think this systemic corruption has gone? Because I think it's gone back a long way.
A long way. I mean, that's an excellent question, and I don't know the answer, but we're talking generations. I mean, this is a generational problem. It far predates Galubsky. That's why I thought it was so interesting. One of the stories I did was about this house where neighbors saw police officers bring women in the middle of the day. There was nothing inside the house but a bed with no sheets on it and a couch. They would bring women, you know, all day. And so they knew what that meant. And that was before Galubsky was on the force. So this is the culture that he walked into. And this is the culture that enabled him to do what he did all those years. And when I say it's generational, there are people still paying the debts to police that their parents supposedly incurred. And by debts, it's, you know, you have to pay me this much, or you can't be in business. You have to pay me this much, or, you know, you'll be arrested for something. I mean, this is very much still alive, this whole situation.
You know, and Melinda, this is Joe again. I know that you had talked about how the Mcintyre case led you into this. So you start unraveling it. Was there a particularly galling moment or some kind of like, when was it that you went, oh my God, this is overwhelming?
Every day. And I'm not saying that to be funny. It was very overwhelming all along and galling from the first. I just couldn't believe he's still walking around. The least of it is that he's walking around living on his government pension, but that just floored me from day one. So going into the thing, you know, all the work that got Lamont exonerated happened before I was there, before I was in Kansas City. I mean, he was freed from prison my first year in Kansas City, but I was not part of any of that. But like I said, I just couldn't believe that could be the end of it. You know, that with everything that had been proven to be true about him, if that really was true, it had been found true in court. How could we just say, well, that's what he did in this one case? How could you not say we have to look at every case he touched for 35 years? And the more we learned, the more that became true. You know, one of the most galling stories was this woman I wrote about who had been in in a very minor scrape. It was actually a misunderstanding. And she got a ticket, really. And so Galubsky calls her and says, I saw your mugshot and you're gorgeous. You need to come down here and fill out some paperwork. So she goes down to, she's never been in any kind of trouble before. So she goes down to headquarters, not knowing that there was be no reason for a homicide detective to be involved in this little case at all. She goes down, he tries to rape her in his office. She is screaming and yelling and her head's hitting the door and nobody does. This is the police headquarters. No one responds. Finally, somebody walking past the door bangs on it, like knock it off. And that's the extent of the reaction. Was that so commonplace in the KCK PD that a woman screaming inside an office was not anything you needed to respond to? So that was beyond. And I knew that story was absolutely accurate because Galubsky then took her to the city attorney at the time to have the ticket expunged, whatever the word is, to have the ticket disappear. And he told me the exact same story that she told me about the words Galubsky used to get the ticket to disappear, even though none of these parties had spoken in many years. But I just thought a police department where that's just so commonplace, it's not even worth responding to. What does that tell you?
Craig has a question. Go ahead, Craig.
Yes, might sound cut out for a minute or two, so I may have missed something, but has anyone in the KCK Police Department or city government or county government been charged on anything yet? And if not, is that still a possibility?
Nobody has been charged in relation to this case. I hope it's still a possibility. The FBI, the federal grand jury investigation is still going on, but it has been going on for a very long time. So sometimes, in my darker moments, I think, is this some kind of Whitey Bulger situation? I mean, I have had people say that Galubsky was an informant. I know he worked with drug kingpins who worked with the DEA. So I hope that's complete rubbish. I hope so much that I'll get up tomorrow and they'll be there with the handcuffs and take them away. And I'll say I was so wrong to have ever doubted these people. But, like I said, I'm still waiting for that day. I mean, what you keep hearing back is, this is such a big case. It just is going to take a long time. But what the victims think is that they're just waiting for him to die. He's not young and he's not well. He has diabetes and some other health problems. And but they're just waiting for him to die so they can say, oh, such a shame. Well, that's that. There's no further we can go with this investigation. And then it will all be pinned on me. I'll be pinned on him. But what people who've worked with him in the drug business say is that he has let it be known for years that if he goes down, everybody goes down. So I know that there is a lot of anxiety about that as well.
There's a question in the room.
And I'm sure that he has made sure that if something does happen to him, the information doesn't die there, right? I'm pretty sure it will hopefully still get out no matter what happens to him.
And there's a question from the room. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is Carol Fields. it is so overwhelming to hear it all. I've lost track on the Star, pardon me. I don't sit on a computer and read the newspaper. And they just increased the price, what was it, 20% or something? Anyway, but it is just so overwhelming. And so I look at it and I say, okay, is there any example of any, this has got to have happened in other places in the US. Is there any other example of how a community got some, restitution, reconciliation, got the balance back closer to where it ought to be? I don't know if you came across that in all your investigations.
First of all, I mean, of course, there have been corrupt cops and corrupt departments elsewhere, but I've honestly never heard of a case. I mean, I was a reporter in New York for years. I've never heard of a case this bad anywhere. And I always say, if I hadn't reported this myself, I would find it unbelievable. And I think that has helped the UG keep all this dirt under the rug, because it does seem just literally incredible. Restitution is a great word, and it's what really this community does deserve. But, first they would have to acknowledge it, that any of this happened. It's always, well, if it happened, it was a long time ago, but did it happen? There has to be a reckoning at some point, but it's beyond frustrating that it hasn't happened yet. My husband says that, I didn't so much pursue this story as I was possessed by it. And that's very much true. I mean, because how can you just keep walking when you hear these stories and they all check out? And I don't understand how officials think that eventually it'll just all be forgotten unless it's first acknowledged and unless there's some kind of justice for the survivors.
Yeah, so I guess back to my other question is, did you come across in any of your investigations of other communities at some level that had that much corruption and have gotten through it and again come to some restitution or something?
I have not heard of any restitution. People normally go to jail. That's what's so unbelievable about this, that it's never been prosecuted, and that, as I've said, victims don't think it ever will be. I mean, they consider it amazing that they finally got to tell their stories. To them, that's a partial victory. But that should just be step one. I mean, all of this should have happened so many years ago.
George has a question.
Yes, the issue I recall with the Quindaro thing at the time was there was a serious level of racism and much more serious segregation in Kansas City, Kansas.
Hmm.
And then there were certain families, and in fact, at hearings, I would go to hearings, and Joe Steiniger was the mayor at the time. Does that name come up because he was able to essentially deny reality many times and cause people to be incredulous with the level of being able to deny such things? Is that kind of common to your experience?
Yes, very much so, for many people. His son Chris ran for mayor this last year, and in a meeting with the editorial board, he said, he kept pointing at me and saying, "You are obsessed. You need to get over your obsession." And he said, we should just have him killed and forget about it. Oh, okay.
Who is we? We should have him killed.
Yeah, he or someone should have him killed and forget about it. I'm sure he was joking, but that is also the way people think over there. I mean, you hear all the time, people have been killed for less than what I'm telling you right now.
I've met him too.
That was a thing I heard.
He's a true believer.
Mhm. Yeah.
Hey, Spencer has a question.
There's a literature that on social construction of crime and media construction of crime, and I'm just wondering what kinds of changes in the media environment would make it easier for these stories to surface and the corruption be fixed.
Well, I think that turn has happened, but for KCK, it was very, very late coming. I mean, the Star really didn't cover KCK for many years. And, that's what happens in any community it becomes a news desert, is corruption, is allowed to go on unchecked. So, I mean, now this, just because I've left, it's not over. They're gonna, keep on covering this, thank goodness. But, I don't know the reasons, but, the Star doesn't have readers in KCK, and why should they when we didn't cover it for so long? So it's kind of chicken and egg, but now that has changed. So.
Melinda, here a question that was in the chat, and I was going to ask this too, is also you talk about the certainly the risk that the victims went through to get through when they speak out, and you talked about police, the risk that when they speak out. What's been your personal risk? What have been the ramifications or blowback for you or concerns?
I have been followed by police and a lot of in KCK, and a lot of the victims are followed by police vehicles, and they'll see them parked in front of their homes. It's very intimidating. That goes on a regular basis. But I never felt that I was in personal danger, and because, I mean, you never know, right? But I just thought, if anything ever happened to me, this story would finally get the attention it richly deserves. So why would they want to make this a national and international story? So, that's if they were thinking rationally. But honestly, I was never afraid on that level, because I thought it was very unlikely that anything would happen to me. And I've been threatened on other stories, but no one ever came right out and threatened me on this story. So
Alice has a question.
First of all, congratulations on your prize. I'm so proud of you for what you've done and the importance of investigative reporting. This is an awkward question. You may not want to answer it, but can we have both investigative reporting and local news?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
We only get little tidbits of syndicated articles and very little local news in Kansas City. It's a Star from what I read, and it's often out of date. So it doesn't seem like we really get local news. We've had this on the program before about the lack of local news.
Well, I guess I don't see it that way, but I see how hard my colleagues work on the news side, and how I think we break great stories all the time. It's a smaller staff, of course, everyone knows that. But I think if people knew how hard everyone on the staff works. I mean, I've been in newsrooms since 1984. And so I know that it used to be possible, for example, to go to lunch. People are really on the clock all the time, working very hard. And so I don't see the criticism on that level, honestly, because I think the Star punches well above its weight in terms of breaking local news.
So why does it fill with all these pictures and covering the whole space And then again, if you just count the number of local stories, it's less than the syndicated stories, but the big full page spreads of pictures tells me they're covering for lack of local in-depth news that covers the whole community. And thank you. Yes, Kansas is getting more coverage.
Yeah, I can't speak to layout. I think a lot of those decisions are based on what readers want. I think readers don't always appreciate how much power they have in shaping coverage because, and like, I don't doubt that you really do want more meat on the bone, but surveys of what readers say they want have never matched up with what they actually read. And it's, you know, so if you ask readers what they want investigative and they want even more foreign news, for example. They want all substance. But if you look, and now we never knew what people read before, except from surveys. Now, when you see what they actually click on, at least online, it's not the good stuff always. It's the fluff. And so that is the answer. Like if more people actually read the good stuff, there would be more good stuff. That's the truth.
Julie, oh, I'm
It
sorry.
is, a lot of it is consumer driven.
Julie has a question.
Okay.
Go ahead, Julie. You have to unmute if you haven't yet.
Okay. My question is, this information came to light when the gentleman that was falsely imprisoned was, told his story, and his mother told the story. What does that, my question is, information comes to light, then does that trigger an investigation from local, like the, I don't know, the attorney, not attorney general, but some local, or does a grand jury look into it, or does the FBI look into it? And where does this information that comes to the surface, where does it go?
Well, see, that's an excellent question. For years, it went nowhere. For years after everything was known about what happened, that, like I said, in Lamont's case, and yet you would think that would trigger an you would think that the police department would say, this is horrible. We're going to respond to this with an independent investigation by some outside body. No, that never happened. Or we're going to go back over all these cases. No, that never happened. It really was, I think, in response to all the coverage that there was finally a federal grand jury, but it's been a long time now and nothing has happened. That's my fear, and the fear of the victims, that that's not going anywhere. But yes, now there is a federal grand jury, and nobody has said that there should be any other investigation. I mean, the DA, Mark Dupree, should be saying, how many other cases like this were there? We're going to go over them. They were supposed to have a whole unit doing that, and then the unit fell apart. That was a big fat mess. And, they say that kind of work is still happening, but who's supposedly doing it? They don't really have a team anymore. So.
Yeah, Craig, go ahead, your question.
Hey, I've got a couple questions and a comment. First question I've got is that I've tried to have Dupree on my radio show too, and he's been on my show a couple of times, talked about other things, but he's made it clear he won't talk about the Galubsky matter whenever he comes on. My question is, do you feel like he's intentionally covering it up and trying to conceal stuff, Or do you think he's just out of abundance of caution, not wanting to let out stuff that might damage the investigation, damage any prosecution that might come up later? So that's my first question.
He doesn't have an investigation going on. So no, I would love to think that. That would be great. I would prefer to think that, but no, I don't think that. I don't know his motivations, but he's not the person he campaigned as. You know, he campaigned as a reformer, and I don't see the reforms.
And another question I have, I know Tara Moorhead was involved in the Mcintyre case.
Right.
Through the research you've done, were there other cases that she did the same things on? And the reason I asked is I defended a guy that she was a prosecutor on in the first-degree murder case. And when I tried to interview my client's sister, she was terrified, kept saying they're going to revoke her probation if she talked to me. And I don't remember who the detective was, but I know Tara was the prosecutor on the case.
Yeah, Tara's been involved in a lot of sketchy cases that, you know, she's been accused of a lot and has been found to have done a lot that should never have happened. You know, they did take her off criminal cases so she could no longer send people to prison for things they didn't do, but she's still a federal prosecutor working on the civil side. I understand that they tried very hard to get rid of her and were not able to do that for whatever reason. So.
One of the comments I had too is that this goes way beyond from what I know, beyond the police department, because when I first located in Wyandotte County, corruption among the Wyandotte County commissioners was known to be rampant as well. So it went way up to the top.
Yes, it's all part of the culture of the whole place.
Yeah.
And, you know, I had one guy whose father was a very well-respected African-American fire official who told his whole family that they were instructed by the police department on occasion to let places burn until they got the word because of, you know, corrupt deals and retribution that the police department was involved in. And this guy said that nearly killed my dad. He you know, it was a horrible thing to live with.
I had several cases where it was obvious too how that a lot of the cops that were involved in drug dealing themselves.
Absolutely, yeah. Galubsky was far from the only one involved in drug deals. And then you hear all the details from these former dealers.
Connie's got a question. Go ahead, Connie.
Hi, do you know if anything is happening with Jay-Z and that Team Rock that we're supposed to be doing something regarding this investigation?
Well, I don't know what, you know, exactly what they're doing right now. I know what they have done, which is, you know, they took out some full page ads in the Washington Post, I know, to beg the Department of Justice to intervene. And I thought that was really great. I know that they have pledged some money for investigations, and that's a great thing. I mean, just to bring the attention to it, you know, was important. As far as what else their investigators have come up with, I don't know that. In fact, I never spoke directly to anyone on Team Rock.
Okay, Spencer has another question.
So I first sort of heard about some of this stuff from Laura McDonald and stuff that Moore Square had been done, and I wonder if she got her inspiration for the work that she's doing in this area from you, or vice versa, or what?
Well, we have the same interest, but I think we were both doing it before we knew each other. Yeah, but they do fantastic work. I love it.
And so, Melinda, I want to ask you, now, are there things that you've done in this, you talked about some of the most horrifying aspects of all this. As far as just the reporter work, I'm curious about the reporting work, because I know that you are a columnist, but you obviously do your own reporting on this. And what is some of the reporting that you're most proud of, or it was the most difficult to get to?
Well, I guess, just the woman I mentioned before who went to work for Galubsky when she was 12, I'm really proud of that reporting, because it took a long time. Not only, building trust is super important in this, right? Like, just because people call and talk to you doesn't mean you just pop it into the paper. A lot more reporting goes into it. And, it's a huge responsibility to have someone come out like this, and they, even though their name isn't on it, because we never name rape victims, for example, unless they're okay with that. And since these people's lives are in danger, we would never name them. But you have to figure that Galubsky knows who we're talking about, from what these stories say. So just sort of walking together to a place where it feels safe enough both to the victim and to me to go forward with the story actually takes a lot. So, and for them too, I feel like telling their stories does bring a measure of safety, like, okay, so I write about this woman. If anything happens to her, that's not going to look good. I think it is a measure of safety, but it's also at the same time, it's a risk. So, like, I had talked to the woman who was recruited when she was 12 for a long time, for many, many months, before the reporting could back up what she was saying, and before we were both confident enough that it would be okay to write it, by which I mean, like, that she felt like it wouldn't put her in a level of danger she wasn't prepared to deal with. And for me to feel like, the worst thing that could happen to a reporter is to have something bad happen to one of their sources, right? To someone they're writing about, especially someone who's trusting you on this level. So as much as she has to feel confident to go forward, so do I. Because the last thing you want to do is cause harm. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, someone might enthusiastically say, yes, I want to talk about this, but then you have to step in sometimes. Okay, let's make sure I want to think on your behalf, not my own here.
I had an experience that was really kind of moving. I mean, I had many moving experiences during this thing, but someone I was talking to, we were going through, I always go through with victims exactly what's going to be in the piece, because I don't want any surprises or anything that might inadvertently reveal more than we're both comfortable revealing. So, one woman was saying, she was saying, yes, let's go with that. But I could tell that there was hesitation behind her yes. And so I said, we don't have to decide this today. Why don't you take another day or two and, figure out how you really feel about whether we should include this one fact. And we'll talk again tomorrow, the day after that. And so we did. And she said, yes, I really do want you to put that particular thing in the paper. And she said, you've just given me the greatest gift anyone's ever given me, because nobody has ever asked me like to take another day or two to decide anything. And you think, oh my gosh, like what a way to live, right? That being given a choice about something very important to you is a new experience. So
George has a question.
Well, you apologized to your fellows in Sacramento. How did they receive you, being such a
So-
famous person?
Yeah, haha. They couldn't have been nicer. They could not have been sweeter. It was a crazy day, but in the best possible way. They really were extremely generous, and we all drank the champagne and ate the cupcakes. That was very nice. And Colleen Nelson, who was my editor for 4 of my 5 years in Kansas City, is now my editor again. She runs the paper out here. And of course, she planned a whole day of festivities, and it was really nice.
Okay, Spencer. you
In
have another
fact,
question?
one of the funniest things though that happened that day, so Colleen plans this happy hour for the staff. And so I'm standing at the bar with a few of my new colleagues, and I'm saying, really, all I want is that so-and-so behind bars. And the bartender goes, oh, we all do. And then we kind of look at him and he said, okay, I just Googled you. So that was funny.
Oh, Spencer. Unmute yourself, Spencer.
Media scholar Robert McChesney for years has asked for government subsidies for journalism, internet savvy reincarnation of the U.S. Postal Service Act of 1792, and some kind of government subsidies to fix the news desert. How do you fix the news desert?
Well, that's tricky. I don't think government can subsidize us because we cover the government and we're supposed to keep them honest. So I think that's a built-in conflict, but I think it's got to come from philanthropic sources, from donors, kind of the NPR model or some kind of grant. I think there's a lot of promise in that sort of thing, but a place like the Star or like the Bee, I mean, we're going to make it or not make it based on digital subscriptions, either kind of subscription, print or digital, because since advertising, we know, fell apart, that's it. So when people complain about, this paywall, I hate, well, what we do does cost money. And I always say, like, do you ask the plumber to come over and because your sink needs attention, you don't expect to have to pay that person? No, you do. And so, I think I really do think of it as an investment in democracy, because in these places that are news deserts, it really does lead to a golden age of corruption. And I think that's what we see in a lot of cases. So,
Okay,
but
Craig, you have a
government
question?
funded, I don't see that working.
Go ahead, Craig.
Yeah, one of the things, when you're looking at police covering up things and the good old buddy system, part of that, I was friends with one of the guys who ran for sheriff. He was not one of the ones who won in Wyandotte County last year, or 2 years ago now. And he said that, you're not going to get rid of this corruption until you can get rid of the general culture in the police department of covering for each other. But there's two reasons why they do that. you've got a lot of them doing it because it's a good old buddy system and they're protecting each other. But then some of them, he said, do want to come forward, but they fear for their life if
True.
they do. So,
True. Absolutely true. That's no joke. People do disappear. People have unfortunate accidents over there.
mhm.
Yeah.
Hey, Melinda, if you ever had a chance to, when you get that chance, if you ever get to talk to Roger Galubsky, have you kind of formulated in your head what you do?
No, I mean, if you mean exactly what I'd say, but I don't think it would be a problem. I would, I have a lot of things to say to him. No, I went a lot of times to places he goes, but I, including his house, but I never found him. So, he has such a temper that I think it could be a more interesting exchange than his lawyers would like, because he communicated a lot I watched the Zoom of his depositions, and I mean, he's rolling his eyes. He's speaking without speaking, even when he's taking the fifth. And he is a very aggrieved person who sees himself as a victim. Yeah, like he's very bitter, for example, that he didn't get a big send-off when he retired from the department. He's very bitter. He says, I wouldn't call cookies from the price chopper much of a party. I guess my gold watch got lost in the mail. So I think he's the kind of person who might actually say something out of pique.
Well, maybe that chance will come. And hang on, because we got some other questions, but we do need to say we've been listening to Melinda Henneberger, the Pulitzer Prize winning columnist now at the Sacramento Bee, doing all that Pulitzer work for here in Kansas City, at the Kansas City Star. So thank you for being with us today, Melinda, and happy Memorial Day to everybody. And it's been a good forum season. This is our last forum of this year. We'll be back. So stay close.
Thanks a lot.